Hello, everyone. Welcome back from the break. I hope you spent some of that time networking with other attendees on the Summit app. Though I wish we could be together in person, virtual gatherings like this still allow us to find and connect with each other. And speaking of connections, we're delighted to connect with our next speaker, the President and CEO of Infrastructure Ontario, Michael Lindsay. Michael is no stranger to the board. He's spoken at our virtual board podium 3 times since he took the helm of IO in 2020. Each time talking about transit, reflecting how clearly he and IO see the link between business success and getting our region moving. Michael, big welcome back.
Dan, it's so good to see you.
Great. Through your regular engagements and board events, we see how year-over-year investments in transit are influencing Infrastructure Ontario's priorities and actions. And in the past year alone, we saw the largest transit investment in Canadian history, more than $26 billion for 4 shovel-ready public transit projects in the GTA. Amazing collaboration between Ontario and Canada's governments. And as you know, a lot of excitement's been generated around these projects. So now they're with you and your team to lead on procurement. So I'm hoping we can start our conversation by singling out the most ambitious of the 4, the Ontario line. We're so supportive of the line because it's a double win. It relieves the downtown Yonge line, which was overcrowded prior to COVID. And even in the context of the pandemic, we need more anywhere to anywhere transit options, which that line helps to achieve. So can you provide an update to our audience on the status of the Ontario Line project? You've made 2 of the line's packaged products, or you have 2 of the line's packaged products in market right now, both in open RFP. So what have you learned so far? What are some of the most innovative approaches you're taking to it? And just where are we on the status of this project?
Yeah, thank you, Jen. And look, good morning, everybody. I hope that everybody who can hear my voice is happy and healthy and hopeful. We shall be together in person again soon, but I'm delighted and privileged to have the opportunity to be with you virtually today. You said it, Jan. Downtown relief, it's happening. The Ontario Line South and the rolling stock systems operations and maintenance contracts for Ontario Line, the request for proposals are going to come in April of this year. And per the market pipeline update that IO provided a couple of weeks ago, we intend to go to market for the northern part of the works in the July to September timeframe of this year. These are the things that we've done intentionally, right, to try to curate as competitive and innovative a set of international respondents as we possibly can, thoughtfully packaging the Ontario Line into bundles of work that we think are appropriately calibrated for the market to respond to, and making sure that the sequencing of how we bring them to market is such that they can be, to use the word, digested appropriately by a genuinely international set of consortia. So far, the competitive response has been terrific. So too have been the commercial discussions that we've been having with counterparties about the way in which we actually want to deliver these projects. And as I've talked about, been very fortunate to discuss with the board before. My friend Phil and I are thinking about how we manage, the risks of a linear project and do that in a more collaborative way on projects like this one. But we're utterly delighted, as I know the board is, that we are so close now to being in the presence of counterparties who are going to be able to start progressing the works associated with the much needed downtown relief that the Ontario Line will provide.
Oh, that's terrific. And I love your reference to the RFPs and making them digestible. So let's pivot that thinking over to the 3 other big GTA projects, the Eglinton Crosstown West, Yonge North, Scarborough North extensions. We've spoken before about trying to complete these extensions more quickly, more affordably, more sustainably. What are the new tools and strategies that have emerged in the past few years that you're employing to achieve those goals?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. Look, some of the strategies that we've put into practice are already bearing fruit. I think they're already proving successful. And the thing that I would point out first and foremost is, in the same way that we thoughtfully developed work packages for the Ontario Line, we did the same thing for the extensions, and we separated tunneling work, created dedicated contracts for tunneling, that are happening right now, right? Tunnel boring machines are being assembled, both in Scarborough and in northern Etobicoke. So digging on these lines is going to begin very soon. I think working with industry, we managed to come up with commercial arrangements and approaches that really incentivized getting that tunneling commenced as fast as we possibly could. Now, for the balance of the works, we've started to bring those to market as well. And eagle-eyed people who follow the inside baseball of procurement contracting will know that we've taken a slightly different approach on the remainder of the works for Scarborough, the systems, rail, and signals contract. Here we're going to do a progressive design build, Metrolinx and Infrastructure Ontario. And I think, as we've talked about before, Jan, the lived experience of almost every jurisdiction in Canada and beyond over the last 15 years is that the period of project design and development and the securing of permits and figuring out what an intentionally constructed construction schedule looks like for big transit projects like this is where sources of delay ultimately live. So by our construct, we're going to get into a development partnership with a qualified counterparty competitively selected to spend 12 to 18 months thinking actively about what risks attend the project. How do we divide them as between public and private sector? How do we provision for them appropriately? And how do we pre-bake with good partnerships with municipalities, utilities, et cetera, some of the key technical considerations that need to be solved for into the project plan? We probably wind up in a very similar commercial construct at the end of the day, but we think increasingly that these types of progressive periods of project development with a counterparty are going to help us expedite the delivery of these projects as much as we can.
Well, no, and that's terrific. And I mean, I think we've got the lived experience in what we're dealing with presently with the Crosstown. It's been a very complex project because of, as we've started with the digging and the tunneling, there are a lot of infrastructure related things we needed to deal with in the geography, as well as all the coordination that needs to happen. So taking that time up front to get that right, to get that sequence makes a tremendous amount of sense. Look, if we look beyond Toronto and to the region, because many of our workers don't live in Toronto, that's another problem we are trying to solve with affordable housing. And let's get back to that in a second with transit-oriented communities. But looking to the region, Infrastructure Ontario is leading procurement for the GO Rail expansion. You just closed the RFP for the On-Corridor Works project. That's the largest capital project in the GO Rail expansion. Any updates on how that project is progressing?
Well, is the answer to the question. Look, once again, I want to situate the Encore contract in the broader GO expansion program, Jan. I hope that people have been observing, whether it's the Kipling Transit Hub or elsewhere, that early works related to upgrading the platform on which bi-directional every 15-minute service will be provided is happening right now. The Encore contract, though, as you say rightly, is effectively the hinge around the service provision that is intended. It's a massive contract. It imagines that somebody is helping us build out, the residual platform on which that service will be provided, and that they are operations partner to Metrolinx for the period of that build. We're bringing together responsibility not only for the continuation of the running of the GO network, but also for building it into what it needs to become in order to achieve the kinds of operational service coefficients that have been announced by government. So again, here is another example. It was actually one of the first places where, with our counterparties, the two remaining bidders, we had quite a bit of back and forth about the commercial basis of such a partnership. And just like I was describing on the Scarborough balance of works procurement, we're taking a very similar approach about thinking about, once we select somebody at the end of this procurement process, creating for ourselves the space to ultimately develop the concept further, to make choices to try to optimize what ultimately gets built, with an eye to making sure that service is itself as optimized as we possibly can be. But yeah, it is something, isn't it? We tend to forget that alongside the largest investment in subway connectivity in Canadian history, we're privileged to work on the largest network rail expansion that the country has ever seen. And I think we would all agree this is a region, regardless of what paradigm we think we live in coming out of COVID-19, that desperately needs that, I would say, arterial investment, right, in the flow of goods and people across the region.
No, absolutely. I mean, pre-COVID, our challenge was how do we get our arms around the growth that was happening with people moving into the region? We don't see that changing coming through COVID. So everything you're talking about just lines up with everything that we've been advocating for many, many years, to be able to take into account growth and create livability options for workers of all income levels that choose to be based here and help our economy thrive. Let's spend our remaining time talking about something that's new thinking new thinking here in the region, transit-oriented communities. I lived in Hong Kong for a long time, and so I've got a strong bias towards transit-oriented communities. And my son knows how to wind me up when we drive by a surface-level subway station. And he said, why don't we build something about that? So let's talk about transit-oriented communities, a huge, huge platform for this bill that's happening. It often involves housing, recreation, other services alongside transit. Why are these becoming more of a priority for Infrastructure Ontario? How are you managing some of those files? And what can we do to help you support the progress on these very important developments? Very, very biased. Let me just disclaim that up front.
I appreciate the offer, and we're going to come back to that. But look, I have to give credit where credit is due, and that is to the government of Ontario, right? That has made it a priority to succeed where other governments for many decades in Ontario have not succeeded, and that is intentionally twinning density, the creation of coherent, cohesive communities with the massive build out of transit that's occurring. As you rightly say, Jan, this is not a new idea. World-class cities all around the world, London, Hong Kong, New York, etc., and I would put Toronto on that list gladly and unapologetically, see the benefit and have realized the benefit associated with integrating the planning of constituencies, communities, and transit projects. I would want to stress a couple of things about this. The first of which is the probably understated economic impact of this activity. Our estimate is that as an echo of the transit investment, which is close to $30 billion in subways, there's probably another $30 billion or more in private construction activity that is enabled by the creation of these communities along the subway line. So it is effectively the second generation of economic development that is prompted by these public works. The second thing that I would say is, the rationale, what we think from a public policy perspective, is quite clear. This is about creating 75,000 units for approximately 130,000 people and 85,000 jobs at or near transit stations. For a city that has housing supply issues, for a city that wants more jobs within the reach of more people, particularly, by the way, the constituencies which are served by a project like the Ontario Line, this type of thoughtful, intentional development of communities is good public policy. And the third thing I would stress is just the way in which we have been charged to go about it, which I trust and hope people will also view as thoughtful. Start from the premise that we are operating under memorandums of understanding related to TOC with the City of Toronto, the Region of York, which commit the province to a lot of back and forth associated with the kinds of development concepts that we ultimately want to catalyze at each one of our stations. Those conversations have been happening since early 2021. I want to commend and thank city officials in York Region and City of Toronto. They've been excellent partners to us as we think about what would really cohere as a development concept for any one of these sites. Partnership has been terrific. But the other thing that we've been doing is engaging the public now increasingly, quite directly, which we think is critically important, right, to the process of public planning and ultimately finalizing what these transit-oriented communities look like. So the province has announced transit-oriented communities at East Harbour, Corktown, Queen and Spadina, King and Bathurst, Exhibition Station, and Bridge and High Tech in the north. They're coming effectively forward for public consultation along the same time as the procurements of the underlying transit projects, and that's intentional in a very real way. But we formed local advisory committees to deal with local stakeholders, local elected officials. We think we've been very transparent about what we believe to be good development concepts that ultimately would work for these communities and neighborhoods, and we're working to take on board feedback ultimately that's being provided to us quite directly by local communities. So it's an idea, if I may say so, that I think not only has a resonant public policy value, but is well past its time in Toronto. And you're not wrong, Jan. I mean, one only has to drive down Bloor Street and to see the holes in the skyscraper, right, that are almost invariably directly tied to the subway stations of a previous generation of investment by the government of Ontario. So we're very excited. If anybody has any questions whatsoever, we have an online engagement website. It's engageio.ca. We desperately want to hear from everybody in connection to what we think is going to be a very, very important municipal city building exercise that we're doing right now in partnership with local governments.
Well, and it's just to close on this, because again, as I said, showing my bias. I mean, there's been some media reporting about, do we need all these towers being built? But you need to think it's not just condos going in. Just like we recently announced that we're putting a school in a condo location downtown. Think of daycare. Think of healthcare services. Anything that can make things livable and more workable for our younger parts of our workforce. If they've got young families, there's so much that can be solved by creating affordability, creating a more livable city, and putting everything within reach. And you spoke to the economic benefit of this transit-oriented community development. In markets like Hong Kong, the development of these communities around transit is funding transit development. So it's a win-win-win on so many counts. So call anytime if there's anything we can do to help advance that and help beat the drums publicly. As always, I always wish we had more time. And Michael, while I've got you, let's get out our calendars for next year, because we definitely want you on next year's Transportation Summit. But thank you so much for returning to our virtual podium, and for all you're doing at Infrastructure Ontario and being so engaged with the work that we're trying to do as well to advance the needs to connect our region, our workers, and our economy. So thanks so much, Michael. I'll let you get back to your busy day.